framework of the 76th UN General Assembly, President of Palestine Mahmoud Abbas condemned the unlawful Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories and called for the regime to honour its obligations. The delegations of the Venezuelan government and opposition sectors began the third round of talks in the Mexican capital. The United Nations World Food Programme has warned that unless it receives urgent funding, 16 million people in Yemen face starvation. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The high-level general debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly continues on Friday as heads of state and government offer their annual addresses. As well as the fourth day of the plenary debate, Friday sees the high-level dialogue on energy, a collateral event that sees the participation of 100 member states and brings together heads of state and government as well as business leaders, foundations and international civil society and youth organisations to mobilise commitments and actions in terms of energy. On Thursday, leaders from low-lying and island nations requested rich countries act more forcefully to counter climate change, which has particularly devastating effects for their nations. Thursday also saw the first ministerial meeting of the Group of Friends in defence of the Charter of the United Nations, an initiative that was proposed by Venezuela and brings together several member states. The 76th General Debate addresses pressing issues affecting the international community, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccination rollout and preparedness ahead of future health crises. Climate change and action to tackle it are also a key feature of the discussions. And speaking before the UN General Assembly as part of the high-level general debate, President of Nigeria Muhammadu Buhari stated that his country will continue supporting the United Nations and its respective forums.
In this regard, my delegation will continue to support the United Nations, an indispensable forum for international cooperation and the cornerstone of the multilateral system rooted in respect for international law, including international human rights law, and predicated on a rules-based order.
Also in the framework of the 76th UN General Assembly, President of Palestine Mahmoud Abbas condemned the unlawful Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip and surrounding Palestinian territories and called for the regime to honour its obligations.
This occupation persists despite having concluded a declaration of principles known as the Oslo Accord to achieve peace and mutual recognition with Israel in 1993, while we remained committed to all of its elements to this day and agreed to every call and initiative to achieve a political solution on the basis of international legitimacy, including the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative and the 2003 Quartet Roadmap, Israel has not honored its obligations under the signed agreements and has evaded participating in peace initiatives and instead pursued its expansionist colonial enterprise, destroying the prospect of a political settlement based on the two-state solution.
In her appearance before the United Nations General Assembly, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, called on the international community to move from talk to action in building a fairer international system.
The answer, Madam Vice President, is that we are waiting for urgent, global, moral, strategic leadership. How many more crises must hit before we see an international system that stops dividing us and starts to lift us up? How many more times must people come to this podium and speak about the plight of the people of Cuba and Haiti? My friends, I fear we leave hunger in need of another hunger. One with real engagement and one to secure real progress. That is what he called for on Tuesday. I regret that the token initiatives will not close the gap. On Monday morning, I said to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom that I was a student in his country, and that as we got off the train, there would be a pre-recorded message each time that simply said, "Mind the gap." Let us, my friends, not only mind the gap, but determine as a global community of nations that numbers matter and that we have the population and the member states to send the signal of the direction that we want our world to go in at this dangerous moment.
Addressing the United Nations General Assembly during the fourth day of the high-level general debate, the President of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, emphasised that Europeans, Germans and the entire international community need to do more to achieve peace and stability in the world.
We Europeans and we Germans have to do more for our own security, need to do more for peace and stability in our neighbourhood and around the world. We need to continue our multilateral efforts in Libya, in eastern Ukraine, in the Middle East. And we are ready to renew the nuclear agreement, and we call upon Iran to return to serious negotiations as quickly as possible.
Also addressing the United Nations General Assembly, Vice President of South Sudan, Rebecca Nyangding de Mabor, acknowledged the support of other nations in achieving independence.
First, I would like to acknowledge that although our independence was product of the struggle and sacrifices of our people, we could not have won without the political and material support from our friends, allies, and partners from around the world. We are deeply grateful to them.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the South. Also addressing the UN General Assembly this Friday, the Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia, Isatou Touré, addressed the disastrous consequences of conflict and insecurity on her country and the African continent as a whole.
Mr. President, today Africa in general is grappling with negative effects of conflict and insecurity. The challenge of addressing the root causes of conflict and climate change require greater global solidarity and UN leadership. Apart from the heavy cost in human and material terms, conflicts impede production, damage infrastructure, prevent the reliable delivery of social services, and disrupt the growth of societies.
During his speech at the United Nations General Assembly, President of Senegal, Macky Sall, explained how his country has been managing the COVID-19 pandemic.
Senegal has engaged in transparent management of the pandemic as soon as it emerged in March 2020. We have been publishing a daily report about this. Moreover, we have deployed an economic and social resilience program to the tune of $2 billion to support households, businesses, workers, and our diaspora. We have significantly expanded the medical resources available to individuals. We have provided free tests and care, and we have gained access to vaccines.
Meanwhile, the Vice President of the Republic of Benin, Mariam Chabi Talata, thanked the United Nations for its specialised agencies for their support in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic.
In this regard, my country appreciates the high priority accorded by the United Nations and its specialized agencies, in particular the World Health Organization, to the search for a definitive solution to this health crisis. Broad and ongoing mobilization, as well as the pooling of efforts, have enabled the development of vaccines. Immunization rates across the world are fairly high, even if Africa still has a low vaccination rate and continues to face other infections which are just as deadly, such as malaria and HIV/AIDS.
This Friday, the delegations of the Venezuelan government and opposition sectors begin the third round of talks in the Mexican capital with the mediation of the Kingdom of Norway. The head of the government delegation, Jorge Rodriguez, stated that in this new phase, the return of the assets held abroad and stolen from the Venezuelan state would be requested. Both delegations issued a communiqué in which they announced that negotiations are still underway and that the next topic on the agenda would be respect for the constitutional rule of law. In the past two rounds of talks, the parties agreed on the ratification and defence of Venezuela's sovereignty over the disputed Guyana Essequibo territory, as well as agreements related to the social protection of Venezuelans. Thousands of asylum seekers, mostly Haitians and Central Americans, are trying to reach the United States. In this context, the United Nations Children's Fund confirmed that the majority of Haitian citizens who have been returned to their country are women and children, including newborn babies. Over 1,300 people have been put on deportation flights by the Biden administration to the Haitian capital Port-au-Prince, regardless of their needs, pleas for asylum, and in some cases absence from their home country for years, or even having not been born there in the case of the youngest children. According to UNICEF figures, 2 out of 3 are women and children. The UN agency expressed concern that Haiti is experiencing a cycle of crisis marked by natural disasters, gang violence, and the effects of the COVID pandemic, meaning that on their return, these people are left without adequate protection, making them even more vulnerable to violence, poverty and displacement, the very factors that drove them to migrate in the first place.
On top of the garbage, sick children, there is no medicine. They have been saying that they are going to bring a doctor since the day before yesterday. They are not bringing anyone. They are abusing us. We need human rights. We need them to help us. We need help, and we need the United Nations and human rights organizations to come here, please.
In Guatemala, 19 villages are at risk due to strong eruptions of the Fuego volcano. The situation has put national authorities and the Seismology Institute on alert. The National Coordinator for Disaster Reduction said the volcano registered between 20 and 30 explosions per minute. Yesim Samoyoya, director of the National Institute of Seismology, said they have put in motion prevention plans to assist nearby residents. According to the agency, avalanches of incandescent material have been registered. The first in the Dry Canyon with an extension of 1.2 kilometres and the second in the Ash Canyon of 1 kilometre. The Fuego volcano registered a slight increase in its activity on September 3rd. The Spanish government declared the island of La Palma a catastrophe area due to the effects caused by the activity of the Cumbre Vieja volcano. After participating in the Council of Government on the Canary Islands, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez highlighted the coordination of all the parties involved to address the emergency. Sánchez pointed out that the island will be rebuilt thanks to the so-called Special Reconstruction Plan, a long-term project. The continuous explosions and the lava advancing towards populated areas of La Palma Island have so far caused more than 6,000 evacuations. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The United Nations World Food Programme has warned that unless it receives urgent funding, 16 million people in Yemen face starvation. The head of the World Food Programme, David Beasley, stressed in a high-level meeting on Yemen's humanitarian crisis that food rations will be cut for 3.2 million and for 5 million people by December unless new funding arrives. He also stated that the UN predicted that 400,000 children could die from starvation next year and urged donors to provide more support for the country. The United Nations Children's Fund estimates that a Yemeni child dies every 10 minutes due to lack of food and malnutrition. In other words, 1,000 infants per week. The US lower house passed a bill to provide the Israeli regime with $1 billion for its missile defense system known as the Iron Dome. Although some Democrats opposed the bill, it was approved by 420 representatives, which means the Senate will now have to ratify the decision. Despite recent tours and promises by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Palestine, the United States continues its funding of the occupying Israeli army, which maintains a blockade against more than 2 million people trapped in the Gaza Strip and frequently bombards them. Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz thanked his US counterpart for honoring his commitment to security. The Biden administration described the investment as coherent in view of the tense situation in Gaza. The government of China released a report detailing US acts of interference in the internal affairs of the Hong Kong administrative region since 2019. According to the document, the United States deliberately interferes in Chinese affairs, particularly in its special administrative regions. The text includes an extensive list of White House actions aimed at slandering China's policies and undermining its sovereignty over Hong Kong, including support for destabilizing movements and the spread of false information to mislead and justify violations of the law. Cuba's regulatory authority has granted emergency use authorization for the domestically produced Soberana Plus vaccine against COVID-19 to be used on people who have recovered from the virus aged 19 and over. The vaccine will be administered in a single dose to patients who have recovered from COVID-19 from 2 months after their recovery. The decision was made taking into consideration that Soberana Plus met the quality, efficiency and safety requirements for this sector of the population and provides beneficial elements in terms of added immunity against the potential risk of reinfection by new variants of the virus, which are more transmissible. To date, 42.2% of the Cuban population has been fully vaccinated. Children are also being vaccinated as part of a plan to have more than 90% of the island immunized by the end of November and begin to reopen international borders by mid-November.
This vaccine strengthens the immunity acquired by these subjects when suffering from the disease, and therefore prevents reinfection during the development of the pandemic.
And the Cuban government announced a partial reopening of gastronomic services in Havana and other provinces where COVID-19 cases are falling. Governor of Havana, Reynaldo Garcia Zapata, explained that more than 500 state and private establishments will reopen in the capital from this Friday, including more than 300 restaurants, 95 coffee shops and the famous Capella ice cream parlour. The governor pointed out that after a year and a half of pandemic closures, it's necessary to reactivate the capital's economic and social life. In order to take this step, government authorities evaluated the epidemiological situation in Havana, taking into consideration the positive evolution recorded in the last 7 weeks, with daily case numbers dropping from almost 2,000 to around 400. The Venezuelan government is preparing for a return to classrooms. At the same time, it maintains biosecurity measures in educational establishments and continues with the vaccination of teachers. In a visit to the south of Caracas, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez explained that authorities are evaluating and implementing biosecurity protocols aimed at avoiding the spread of the virus in educational institutions. The Vice President reported that more than 1,000 schools and secondary education centres are undergoing maintenance works to guarantee a safe return to classrooms. She also stated that the necessary batches of vaccines to immunise children and youth will arrive in Venezuela in the next few days.
We are working on all the infrastructures, but we must also inform that 81% of our teachers are already fully vaccinated for the 7-to-7 teaching system. We are waiting the arrival of new vaccines for our children and adolescents to immunize this population. We were looking at the biosecurity plans within the schools, the use of face masks. I have already explained to the students the use of face masks, and if they see a student without a face mask, they tell them, put your mask on. We are going to have all the process of hand disinfection, try to prevent our children from crowding. It is a biosecure return to school that our President Nicolás Maduro has asked us to do, and that is what we are checking now.
Now we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.